Now, South Africa faces a 30% tariff on its exports to the United States, and that kicks in tonight. And this move is expected to cost tens of thousands of jobs after the country failed to secure a trade deal before a deadline that was set by US President Donald Trump. And now, with the imposition of varying tariffs on goods imported to the United States coming into effect, can we still be seen as an investment-friendly and a reliable partner, even as global power dynamics grow more unpredictable? To help us unpack this, we're joined virtually now by the CEO of Brand South Africa, Neville Matjie. And Brand South Africa, of course, the agency responsible for promoting and protecting our national image, both at home and abroad. Neville, good to have you with us. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning to the viewers, and thank you, Sakina, to you and the team.
It's a very uncertain time for so many countries, but South Africa in particular, given how our relationship with the US seemed to have really strained over the past few years. So from that perspective, how strong are we as Brand SA when looking at the US market at this stage?
So what we've discovered, Sakina, in the last few years, as you've indicated, there's been a little bit of a strain in terms of the political side. On the business side, it has been actually quite strong and has continued to be strong. Unfortunately, these tariffs create a different spin in the game, because what these tariffs now do, they create a sense of uncertainty, particularly for the private sector in terms of the US market. And how that has affected us as South Africa it's really early days at the moment, but you've this whole morning you've actually spent time interviewing quite a number of guests who've indicated the potential harm that these tariffs are going to have on South Africa, particularly in the automotive sector. How the US market has always been responding to us, and we were there a few months ago and a few weeks ago. A lot of the private sector are still very interested in the South African market from an investment perspective, not to export back to the US, but to export into the African continent, capitalizing on the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. So from that perspective, you have sort of a two-pronged approach in that regard, that you have those companies that are still very interested, knowing that South Africa is a stable economy, stable market, and easier to actually do business from South Africa as an entry point into the rest of the continent. And then you have those that are, of course, exporting to the US, that are currently doing business in the US. And the message has been quite clear that they've got to look at market diversification. They've got to look at other areas. It's unfortunate for the US because what it does, not only for South Africa, but globally, because, it's many countries, as you've reported, it now makes the US unattractive to many countries, which means that we now need to specifically not keep all our eggs in one basket, particularly, the 8% that is currently being exported to the US. We've got to now look at other markets, and we've seen a number of approaches from other countries. India has invited South Africa to the India-Africa Summit, which is taking place, and they've highlighted South Africa as the partner country where they're wanting to strengthen the ties with South Africa. We've seen the same with the UK. We've seen the same also from the Far East. So there's quite a number of initiatives that have really shown sort of a positive to the dilemma that we're currently experiencing at the moment.
And, you touch on the Africa Free Trade Area, and this is a market that has been identified for quite some time. But in 2025, what is our brand proposition as South Africa to and on the continent, given, some of the instances where some of our neighbors and other countries on the continent have branded us as xenophobic? So what is our brand proposition on the continent?
Yeah, so what we've continuously maintained, really, from an African perspective, has been two critical areas. One contribution in as far as trade and investment is concerned within the African continent, despite the issues around xenophobia, which, of course, from the private sector, they view a lot of trade and investment engagements quite differently to, of course, the general perception that is out there. And their drive has been purely on the business side. And it's been quite clear that doing business with South Africa has been, of course, the most optimal and the right type of decision to take. And then the second part is really led by our international relations team through the minister there and the team from international relations, really looking at diplomatic as well as peacekeeping issues from that front. As Brand South Africa, what we've done is really focused predominantly on the trade and the investment side, which is a catalyst for us to really promote not only South Africa, but also to promote intra-Africa trade. That is very key for us and very critical. We've also partnered quite closely with the Secretariat of AFTA, including His Excellency Wamkele Mene, as well as the African Bank, in ensuring that we can continue to market products from South Africa into the continent and look at products that as South Africa we don't have that can be exported from the continent. This shift, Sakina, has really created a momentum, and I'm hoping that a lot of our countries, and predominantly, especially from our side, we're going to be aggressive in marketing closer relations and closer collaborations in other markets, our other existing markets. Let's see how we can expand those markets. We are going to also be participating at the Intra-Africa Trade Fair, which is taking place in September. And our focus there is on the automotive sector. And there's a reason why we pushed our energies towards the automotive sector, because that's a sector that is going to be hit in terms of these tariffs, predominantly, and of course the agricultural sector as well. But our focus really from an IATF perspective would be on the agricultural sector. We're working closely with the sector to ensure that we can promote and market the strength of that sector. Key challenges, of course, in the sector within the African continent has been, of course, only a few countries have actually protected the sector. There's a lot of cheap imports coming in from the Far East, countries such as Japan, etc., that are bringing in second-hand vehicles into the rest of the continent. And that is where the diversification strategy from an African perspective needs to play a huge part in ensuring that we can start promoting vehicles that are assembled within the African continent.
And just as we wrap this up, Neville, given our brand and what we stand for as a nation, we are of course living in an age where there's a whole lot of misinformation and disinformation that we find on various global platforms, and this of course distorts our national image. As Brand South Africa, how are you counteracting this disinformation and narrative manipulation about South Africa?
Yeah, so we are approaching it from three different areas. The first one is dealing with the issue around algorithm, because that is where a lot of distortion comes in, and we would have seen what has happened in some of the key sites such as X, etc., where a lot of disinformation is actually being channeled through those sectors. So we are really working very hard together with the private sector to enhance how we position ourselves and to, of course, work within the system to ensure that we improve the messaging about South Africa. The second component really is dealing with on the ground in terms of the media and ensuring that we have a first right of response in critical markets, because what has been happening, and this is from our studies, that a lot of individuals are interviewed in markets, but there's no response from a government perspective and from a South Africa perspective. So we've put systems in place to ensure that with all the networks, particularly in the US, in the UK, and in some of the European countries, that we have a response from a South Africa perspective to really deal with the right type of messaging. And then the third area is really to go in market, to ensure that we are present in market, we continue to echo the messaging in the different markets. As I've said, we are focusing on the US, but we're not exclusive. We're also focusing on the EU, because the messaging tends to go wild into different different markets, and it's important that we have a presence in every single market for us to be able to respond to these messages with the right type of information and the correct information about South Africa, and to protect the brand South Africa.
Well, Neville, thanks so much for your time. Neville Matjie is the CEO of Brand South Africa, speaking to us there about the implication of the incoming tariffs on South Africa as a brand. And of course, that has been all the talk this morning, talking about how South Africa will be impacted by those tariffs when they come into effect at midnight.